Hi everyone. Today we are going to start with our first chapter, language learning in early childhood. And we will cover first language acquisition issues such as some patterns and sequences in first language development. Then we will focus on some theoretical approaches to first language acquisition such as behaviorism, innatism and interactionism. Also, this chapter will cover language disorders and delays, and also some issues on childhood bilingualism. However, I would like to start with some definitions, especially first language, second language, foreign language, and target language. So, what is the first language? The first language is the language or languages that an individual acquires first. There are some other terms to indicate first language, such as native language or mother tongue. And also, another newly coined word is home language. This is also used to indicate first language. I'm sure the definition of second language might be easier after the first one. Basically, in a broader sense, it is any language other than the first language learned. In a broader sense, in a narrower sense, on the other hand, second language is a language learned after the first language in a context where the language is used widely in the speech community. For instance, for many people in Taiwan, their first language is Taiwanese and their second language is Mandarin. When it comes to the definition of foreign language, it is a second, in some cases third or fourth, language that is learned in a context where the language is not widely used in the speech community. However, the foreign language often contrasted with second language learning in a narrower sense. For instance, English or Japanese is a foreign language for many people in Turkey. What about target language? Target language is a language which is being learned where it is the first or second or the third language. For instance, English is a target language for you now, or your students as well. Another definition that I would like to focus on today is acquisition and learning. Actually, acquisition and learning are two sides of the SLA coin. Most of the people wonder what is the difference between learning a language and acquiring a language. But I am sure you will cover it, you know it actually. Acquisition refers to the subconscious process of picking up a language through exposure. The keywords here are picking up and exposure. It is the process by which human beings acquire the capacity to perceive and comprehend language, as well as to produce and use words and sentences to communicate. There are two types of language acquisition. The first one is naturalistic language acquisition, which is languages learned through communication that takes place in naturally occurring situations. And the other one is instructed language acquisition, which is languages learned through study with the help of guidance from reference books or classroom instruction. So, what about language learning then? Learning refers to the conscious process of studying a language. Again, the keywords here, conscious process and studying a language. There are two types of language learning. One of them is implicit learning, which takes place without either intentionality or awareness. And the second one is explicit learning, which is necessarily a conscious process and is likely to be intentional. According to Krashen, acquisition and learning are two different things. For instance, learning refers to the conscious process of studying. On the other hand, acquisition refers to subconscious process of picking up a language through exposure. Today, after that definition, let's look at some patterns in first language development, which means some characteristics of the language of children. We all know that their language development shows a high degree of similarity among children all over the world. Either Turkish or Russian child follow the same developmental patterns in language development. These patterns are also predictable patterns, and they are in line with children's cognitive development. We also know that the language of children reflects the word order of the language that they are hearing, and the combination of words has meaning relationship. We also know that children's language shows that they are able to apply the rules of the language to make sentences which they have never heard before. This is related to the creativity side of the language. So far, we covered some definitions such as first language acquisition, first language, second language, foreign language, target language, and also difference between acquisition and learning. We also covered some developmental patterns about language, characteristics of children language. Now we will focus on some milestones or that developmental sequences in detail. The first milestone in child's language acquisition starts before first words, which is also called pre-speech stage. This pre-speech stage has also some other phases. For instance, the first phase is the earliest vocalization. In the earliest vocalization, children show involuntary crying, especially when they feel hungry or uncomfortable. They also cooing and gargling, which shows satisfaction or happiness. Then it followed by babbling. Babies use sounds to reflect the characteristics of different language they are learning at that stage. In the babbling stage, children start to babble at around 4 or 6 months of age. They are characterized by indiscriminate utterances of some speech sounds. Very few consonant clusters and repeated syllables are common in babbling stage. We know that during this stage, infants can distinguish between p and b sounds at 3 or 4 months. For instance, there is an example in our book. In that example, an experiment with ba played versus pa, a 2-month-old infant showed awareness of the change, which means she or he recognized the difference between pa and ba sounds. However, although children babble some sounds such as ba, ba, ma, ma, da, da, children do not learn how to use these sounds until much later. The second stage in child language development is holophrastic stage. This is also called one-word stage. Infants may utter their first word as early as 9 months. Usually they pronounce mama, dada, which resemble babbling actually. If an infant hears either mommy or daddy, they look toward the appropriate person at that age. Interestingly, deaf babies whose parents use sign language begin making their first words, which are gestures, when they are 8 months old. You see the picture of a 12-month-old boy who gestured daddy in sign language. This stage, one word stage, is characterized by the production of actual speech signs. Often the words are simplified, such as da for duck or ba for bottle. We also hear in Turkish, for instance, bu for water or su. So the first words comes to scene around 12 months. This is still in one word stage, holophrastic stage. Babies begin to produce one or two recognizable words, especially content words, and they produce single word sentences. They send messages through their one word sentences. By the age of 2, the 2-word stage comes. They know at least 50 different words at the age of 2. Also, the sentences they produce at this age is called telegraphic sentences, which has no function words and no grammatical morphemes, such as mommy juice or baby fall down. This telegraphic speech refers to 2-word stage of language development. They reflect the order of the language they hear, such as they say kiss baby, subject verb order, and also they creatively combine those 2 words, such as more outside, all gone cookie. These 50 words tends to be names of important person, greetings, foods, highlights of the daily routine, such as bath, and ability to change their environment, give, take, go, up, down, and open. However, the meaning of words may not correspond to that of adult language. They overextend the meanings of the words in that stage. For instance, a dog may mean any 4-legged creature if they see the dog first as a 4-legged creature. Also, ball may mean any round object. Bird may mean any flying object also. At the 2-word stage, they start to combine the words. That's why this is called combining word stage as well. In the combining word stage, which is by 2.5, most children speak in sentence of several words, but their grammar is far from complete. This stage rapidly progresses into what has been termed a 5th and final stage of language acquisition, the all hell breaks loose stage. By 6, the child's grammar approximates that of an adult. Children learning any language seem to encode the same limited set of meaning in their first sentences. For instance, they know the ownership while producing daddy's shoes. Or they describe events such as me fall, even if they did not use functional words or grammatical morphemes. They also know locational relations such as toy in box. At the 2-word stage, sentences are usually 2 words. Children can repeat more complex sentences at that age, at that stage, spoken by adults especially, but cannot create them until later. The ends of words learn more quickly. For instance, raf for giraffe, mato for tomato, narna for banana. The rest of the acquisition of grammar is idiosyncratic, which means some children repeat more, others create more, some children learn earlier, some children learn later. Also, some children produce a great number of words before beginning to combine them into sentences. Others immediately begin to make sentences. That's why the acquisition of grammar is idiosyncratic. There may be several individual roads to mastering one's native language. Depends on the exposure of that child. So let's review those stages. Between 6 and 12 weeks, children cooing, we see cooing, such as goo goo or gargling, coo coo. When they become 6 months old, they start babbling, baba, mama, dada. Then, around 8 or 9 months, they use intonation patterns and one-word sentences. Through 1 year and 1.5 years is one-word stage. They send their messages through one-word sentences. When they become 2 years old, two-word stage starts. And in 2.5, they use telegraphic sentences, which means there is no function word or grammatical morphemes in their two-word sentences. By 3 or 4 to 11 years, they become fluent speakers. However, there are some errors in WH questions. And after 12 years, they become fluent speakers in the mother tongue. In this picture, you see the summary of child language developmental milestones. So, the earliest vocalizations are simply the involuntary crying that babies do when they are hungry or uncomfortable. They distinguish the voice of their mothers and other speakers and seem to recognize the language that was spoken around their mother before they were born. Also, we know that babies are capable to hear the difference between sounds as similar as pa and ba. They will continue to respond to these differences for a longer period when they hear more than one languages. In spite of different backgrounds, different locations, and different upbringings, most children follow the same milestones in acquiring their first language. So, let's focus on some first language developmental sequences, such as acquisition of grammatical morphemes, acquisition of negation, and also acquisition of question. All of these sequences have also some stages. For instance, in a study conducted by Roger Brown, an approximate order of acquiring grammatical morphemes was defined as present progressive, ing, plural s, irregular past forms, possessive s, copula, emizar, articles, regular past ed, third person singular simple present, auxiliary be are the grammatical morpheme order. That means children learn first present progressive, then they learn plurals, then irregular past forms, etc. While defining the stages in learning of grammatical morphemes, a well-known test, which is WAG test, is used. In such test, for example, here's an example. It says, here is a WAG. Now there are two of them. There are two. If the child say to wax, which means he or she covered plural. Also, John knows how to bat. Yesterday he did the same thing. Yesterday he, if the child say batted, which means children learn past tense ed. If you want to see further examples on WAG test, just search on the YouTube or other websites. There are plenty of examples videos on VOC test. I suggest you watch one of them at least. Through the test, children demonstrate that they know the rules of the formation of plural and simple past in English in these two examples. By generalizing these patterns to words they have never heard before, they show that their language is not just a list of memorized words, pairs, such as book, books, not nodded. When it comes to negation, another study, Louise Bloom's study, figured out 4 stages. Children acquire first saying no. Negation is usually expressed by the word no, either all alone or as the first word in the utterances. If they want to refuse something, they just say no, such as no go, no cookie. The second stage is utterances grow longer and the subject may be included, and the negative word appears just before the verb. For example, daddy, no compare. The third stage in negation is adding negative element into a more complex sentences, such as, however, adding forms of negative other than no, such as can't and don't, but they do not know variations for different person or tenses. They just say, I can't do it, he don't want it, for instance. In the fourth stage, children begin to attach the negative elements to the correct form of auxiliary verbs such as do and be. He didn't go, she doesn't want it. These are good examples. But sometimes some children produce double negatives while learning negation, such as I don't have no more candies. As for acquisition of question, Louise Bloom's study showed that there are 6 stages in children's question making. In the first stage, children use single words or single 2 or 3 word sentence with rising intonation. Mommy book, for instance. In stage 2, children start to use the word order of the declarative sentence, such as you like this, but again we see the intonation. In stage 3, children start to add the verb at the beginning of a sentence, which is called fronting, such as is the teddy is tired, or do I can have a cookie. As you see, they use the sentence and add just fronting verb. In the fourth stage, subject auxiliary inversion in yes/no questions, but not in WH questions, which means they can able to convert subject auxiliary, but only in yes/no questions, such as do you like ice cream? In stage 5, subject auxiliary inversion is also seen in WH questions, but not in negative WH questions, such as why can't he go out? Why he can't go out? In stage 6, they start to overgeneralize the inverted form in embedded question as well. They may ask, I don't know why can't he go out? Let's review them in a nutshell. In the first stage, which is children's earliest questions, are single words or simple 2 or 3 word sentence with rising intonations, such as cookie, mommy book. In the second stage, children use the word order of the declarative sentence with rising intonation. You like this, I have some. In the third stage, children notice that structure of question is different and begin to produce question by using can or be. Can I go? Are you happy? In the first stage, some questions are formed by subject auxiliary inversion. They also add do in questions in which there would be no auxiliary in the declarative version of the sentences. Are you going to play with me? Do dogs like ice cream? Are common questions that may be asked by children. In the fifth stage, both WH and yes-no questions are formed correctly. However, they have difficulties in negative WH questions. Are these your boots? Why did you do that? Is possible questions that they may ask. In the sixth stage, children are able to correctly form all question types, including complex embedded questions. Let's move on some other details about questioning. Louis Bloom's study also shows us an approximate order of the occurrence of WH question words. Which WH question comes first, do you think? Yeah, what. However, they learn it as a chunk. What's that, what's it is learned first. The second WH questions are where and who. The third one is why, which is especially emerged at the end of the second year and becomes a favorite at the age of 3 or 4. They usually ask why of something. In the fourth stage, they learn how to ask how and when. However, children do not fully understand the meaning of adults' responses when they ask when. A good example is here. For instance, child asks, when can we go outside? Mommy responds, in about 5 minutes. Then child counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can we go now? Which show that they do not know the timing, and however, they can use when. In preschool years, children, which means by the age of 4, children able to ask questions, give commands, report real events, and create stories about imaginary ones with correct word order and grammatical markers most of the time. They have mastered the basic structures of the language or languages spoken to them in these early years. They begin to acquire less frequent and more complex linguistic structures such as passives and relative clauses by the age of 4. In the school years, children develop their language as they grow up. Reading gives a major boost to metalinguistic awareness. It leads them to access word jokes, trick questions, riddles, etc. In the school years, children also develop vocabularies. However, the amount depends on how widely they read. What does metalinguistic awareness mean? Metalinguistic awareness refers to the ability to treat language as an object separate from the meaning it conveys. A dramatic development in metalinguistic awareness occurs when children begin to learn to read. They see words represented by letters on a page and start to discover that words and sentences have multiple meaning. For instance, when you say, drink the chair, a 5-year-old's reaction might be silly. Or cake to eat, a 5-year-old's reaction is wrong. But this is the trick here. Why is caterpillar longer than train? Most of the children know the answer, but in most cases we do not. Since they are in the concrete stage, they just look the letters. As you see, caterpillar has 11 letters, train has only 5 letters. So that's why caterpillar is longer than train. When it comes to development of vocabulary, the rate of children's vocabulary development is influenced by the amount of the talk they are exposed to. The more speech that is addressed to a toddler, the more rapidly the toddler will learn new words. That's why you should speak to the children most of the time. One of the most impressive language development in the early school year is astonishing growth of vocabulary. Vocabulary grows at a rate between several hundreds and more than 1,000 words a year, depending mainly on how much and how widely children read or exposed to that language. Vocabulary growth required for school success is likely to come from both reading for assignments and reading for pleasure. So, reading a variety of texts is an essential part of vocabulary growth. Ask your students to read as much as possible. Also, reading reinforces the understanding that language has forms as well as meaning, and a word is separate from the thing it represents. Another important development in the school years is the acquisition of different language registers. When we say language register, children learn how written language differs from spoken language, how the language used to speak to the principal is different from the language of a narrative, or in what circumstances, what kind of speech is made is learned in the school years by means of language registers.